The church is interesting in the Jacksonville mission, mostly because it's so diverse. I mean, you have big cities that you go into, and there's good strong congregations. And you go out in the country, and the people are so completely different, but they're still strong congregations. They still practice any the same way. I never personally served in any branches. I served only in wards. But I know there are a few branches. A couple of my districts and zones, there were some branches, and it's just like anything. They're small, but they're faithful, and they're doing the best they can. So because I was in just wards, membership was about 120 to roughly 150-ish, except for when I was in Gainesville, because it's a college town, and I served in what was essentially the married student ward of Gainesville for the University of Florida. And there's so many medical residents there. People only live there for 3 years while they're in their residency. And it had the reputation of being the loudest ward in the mission, because there were over 200 children that were primary aged, and half of those were nursery age. And so sacrament meeting was really loud. But other than that, you figure about 100 to about 120 a week, and a lot of locals. Depends where you are. When you're in the country, you got your rednecks, and they love their giant trucks and their guns and things like that. And you go to the cities, people are a lot more, refined, so to speak. They're white collar jobs and things like that. So it is very different. You see temples. So the closest temple to where I was at was the Orlando Temple. I believe, yeah, that's still the case. The Orlando Temple is the closest temple to my mission. However, when I was in the Savannah Zone, which is no longer in the Jacksonville mission, they were part of the Columbia, South Carolina Temple District. And so we were kind of split when I was there. I imagine it's all part of Orlando now, because that part's no longer in the mission. So my mission was very interesting. You have Florida, and it's kind of the panhandle thing right here. My mission was kind of this top part right here, and it cut up along the coastline of Georgia. And when I was in the mission, my first transfer, it was just Florida, the Florida part of the mission. There was a little part of the Georgia coastline. And after my first transfer, the Macon mission split, and we got the Savannah Zone, which was, so we had the entire coastline of Georgia and a tiny little corner of South Carolina. And I was in that zone for a couple of transfers in an area called Pooler. But it split again after I left the mission. And I served from 2011 to 2013. And so a few months after I left the mission, the age change came around, and so they reformed the mission and took the Savannah Zone with them again. So that's not part of the mission anymore. But so most of the mission is in Florida. You don't have to worry about serving anywhere fancy. You might serve in Georgia for a bit, but most of the mission is just that part of North Florida right there. I was in Georgia for one area, and the rest of my areas were in Florida. People don't really think of Florida as the South, but North Florida is very much Southern. I mean, the Southern pride, all that fun stuff. And so it's highly, highly, highly religious. People love Jesus down there, which was great, because we had a lot of common ground when we would go out and do missionary work. It's like, how's Jesus Christ bless you today? And people are like, oh, I hate Jesus, or I don't know who Jesus is. And we're like, oh, I love Jesus Christ. He's blessed me with this and this and this and this. I go to church every week. And so finding common ground was super, super easy, because people are so religious down there. And it's so easy to teach someone who already has that basic background and already has a great faith. It's simply adding to faith they already have, which was, for me, it was great, because I'm not so much of a, ground up type of teacher. I really like building off what people said. So when people knew they had faith in Jesus Christ, and they attended church, and they had the basic understanding, it was just really simple for me to come in and be like, hey, take what you believe. We got so much more of it. It's so much better. And so, I mean, I taught Baptists, Catholics, pretty much all the Protestant religions. Taught an agnostic once or twice. it's a very Christian environment down there, and so people really love Jesus Christ, and which makes tracting a little bit difficult because people are like, oh no, I already have my own church, and things like that. However, you didn't get a whole lot of doors slammed in your face because, you know, Southern hospitality it's a real thing. You know, people are very hospitable in the South, and they'll open the door and they'll listen to you and they'll say, well, I appreciate you coming by. We already have our own church, but I really like the fact that there's young men out here trying to spread the word of Jesus Christ. And so, you know, just people are really nice. They appreciate that what you're doing is in the name of Christ, and so they're very nice. They'll give you a bottle of water on the way out, things like that. So there's 5 missions in Florida. The Jacksonville, I can't remember if it extends the furthest north. It might not anymore because Tallahassee is kind of right next to it, parallel. However, we have more of Florida in our mission than Tallahassee does because Tallahassee just has the panhandles. It's a little tiny thin strip of Florida, and we have pretty much everything south of the panhandle and right next to it. And so I would imagine that I think we have the largest chunk of Florida in the mission. Orlando might have more of it. I'm not too sure. I haven't checked my geography lately, but really I think the demographics are what make our mission so different because, you know, I had relatives that lived in Miami for a while. It's part of the Fort Lauderdale mission, and they talked about how, you know, the big cities and things like that, and lots of Cubans, lots of Russians, things like that. And I hear my sister, my sister served in the Orlando mission, and she worked with a lot of old people, a lot of students and things like that. And then here I was, you know, I worked in a great variety of places. You know, I worked in some very wealthy areas. I worked in some very, very ghetto areas. I worked in the country a lot. I worked in the city a lot. So it was just very, very diverse. You know, the mission was just very different. You know, you go one side of the mission to the other, and it's just very different. So.